Here's the deal. Trump likes to play at president. There's the military parade where he gets to make his military perform for his amusement as if they were toy soldiers. There's his childish use of Twitter to bully his own cabinet members when they misbehave. There are those cabinet meetings where he makes his appointees sing his praises. And now this, his gleeful use of pardons to wave his magic wand and impress his celebrity friends. Trump likes the trappings of the presidency more than presidenting. But presidenting is supposed to be boring and tedious and thoughtful. You're a public servant, not the boy king. But who has time for that when Kim K is on the phone? Let's discuss this with CNN political director David Chalian and senior writer at the National Review, David French. David Chalian, let me start with you. Let's first say that the pardoning of Alice Johnson is, I think, virtuous. Some of the others, not so much. But even Johnson has a celebrity attached to her. Is this just about Trump's attraction to shiny objects, or is there some underlying new policy here where he wants to take a more compassionate view towards convicted felons?
Right. It's hard to imagine this particular commutation of a sentence for Alice Johnson that probably would not have taken place if it weren't for Kim Kardashian West going into the Oval Office and taking up this cause. As you said, that doesn't mean it's not a worthy action. Perhaps it is, but it's just hard to imagine how this would have taken place without it, because as you know, Essie, one of the things, which this is not just particular to President Trump. Many presidents have gone around the formal process for certain pardons, but he hasn't used the actual DOJ process yet in any of his pardons. And usually presidents do this much later in their term when it's sort of wanting to sort of at the end of their time before they walk out the door, put a stamp on something and express this kind of grace in some way. Not usually early in your term, and not without any process taking place. We just haven't seen how Donald Trump would actually work the pardon system through the regular DOJ process. Yeah, which usually vets these pardons and commutations. David French, let's take a historical view. As David Chalian mentioned, Trump is not the first to use his pardon power, right, to help his friends. Bill Clinton famously pardoned Mark Rich, his friend, and Roger Clinton, his brother, nor is Trump the first to pardon controversial figures. You had President Obama commute Chelsea Manning's sentence, H.W. Bush pardoned Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger for Iran-Contra. Even Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon was controversial. So what's the big deal?
Well, you know, I think there's a point there, and that is when we have this norms and values talk here, this is one of those areas where you can say that Trump is not transgressing recent norms and values. We've seen some pretty egregious pardons. But the question that's really interesting is there some sort of nine-dimensional chess here that Trump is playing, where he's trying to send messages to people who are currently under investigation? And that's what a lot of people are wondering right now. And usually when the question is Trump playing nine-dimensional chess, the answer is absolutely not. But in this case, there might be some merit in the idea that he's showing that he's happy to pardon people. But if you're a Paul Manafort, I think counting on a Trump pardon as sort of part of your defense strategy or as a part of the equation as to whether or not you're going to ultimately plead out to any of these offenses, I think is a very bad idea.
Well, and do you think that could, David French, do you think that could impact the ongoing investigation at all?
You know, I think it's possible that some of the folks who are under investigation may choose to believe that they can withhold cooperation or maybe run greater risks than they ordinarily would because they feel like they have a pardon in their back pocket. But look, I think that's flawed thinking on their part. Trump is going to make decisions based on Trump's best political interests. And it may very well be that he'd reach a point where he'd say, you know, look, I've dangled this pardon and I've gotten what I've wanted out of dangling this pardon, but I don't want to go through the political pain of pardoning any of these guys.
Right.
And so that's a real possibility here.
And David Chalian, what do you think about this idea that Trump might be using these to signal to witnesses in the Russia investigation that he might have their back?
Right. Well, when you ask his defenders about that, their answer immediately is he doesn't need to advertise it. It's a known power of the presidency. This isn't news to Paul Manafort or Mike Flynn or Michael Cohen that the president has pardon power, but it is very hard to see how, when the president is in a phase right now of cherry picking cause celebs that he can put his pardon power on, to not think that he may be demonstrating that publicly so that it can be very much in the news and before these very people's eyes day to day, that he's willing to exercise that power. It's hard not to see it as some public reminder of that.
Well, and David Chalian, some folks are really excited about Trump's use of early pardons. Take a look at this little montage.
I would be forever indebted to the president for a pardon. He sees an injustice and he corrects it. And I'm humbly asking him to correct this.
He was, and we are all so grateful that the president is thinking of us in this way. We know that President Trump is a kind man and he's compassionate. He's always been kind to my family. He knows how important it is that my husband gets home to be a father to our daughters.
George pled guilty for lying to the FBI. My appeal to the argument he deserves a pardon is precisely because we have to dig into the nature of these lies.
So that was a former CIA officer and the wives of Rod Blagojevich and George Papadopoulos, all turning to cable news to plead for the kind and generous president to pardon their loved ones. I mean, that's remarkable.
This is one of my favorite aspects of this entire story, because it's as if they all went to the school together and took the lesson and had to talk to an audience of one of President Trump, where you go to do it, how you do it. And it is amazing to watch them execute this kind of strategy, because we know how this actually does work for him. I mean, if anybody advising them would say this is a smart thing to do, it's just amazing to see it so blatantly on display, and yet it may have impact.
It may work. David French, let's talk about one particular pardon, conservative commentator Dinesh D'Souza. This one has a lot of people miffed. Why don't you try to explain why?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is a guy who, let's just say that, well, there's really no question that he was guilty of the crime he was charged with.
Yeah.
And then it also has developed a really, really toxic voice in public, but also has been, you know, among the leading MAGA cheerleaders. And so there's no real repentance here. He's claimed all along that it was a political prosecution from the get-go. And there are a lot of people who believe that's right, including some of my friends and colleagues who believe that regardless of what his Twitter personality is now, regardless of how he, you know, uses his considerable gifts now, that was a political prosecution. I'm not so sure about that. He had an actual opportunity to make that case in the prosecution of his case, and he couldn't make that case. He couldn't prove that it was a political prosecution. He's guilty. He's unrepentant. That is not a roadmap, I believe, for a proper pardon.
Yeah, it seems like with Dinesh and maybe even like Sheriff Joe, those are political statements for the president. David Chalian, David French, thank you very much. This was a fun combo. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Up next, Rudy.